Welcome to another episode on Christian School Radio. I'm here with our host, Pastor Blair.
Yeah, and we've kind of got a different show today.
Mm-hmm.
We're recording it with visually recording
Cameras.
this one? Huh?
Cameras.
Cameras, is that what they're called? I was going to ask. Yeah, so if we had a YouTube channel address, we'd send them there, but we'll have to do that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, another thing that I wanted to announce before we got too far into it is a few of our past shows we had to upload on Monday, right? We had the one where I was gone. You guys did a great job on that, by the way. We had, then school was canceled for 3 days because of the weather. And then, but anyway, we found out that uploading on Monday was actually more popular than when we did it on Fridays. So we will be uploading on Mondays from now on. Is that correct, Zach?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I did want to get that out of the way. If anybody is wondering why we didn't upload this last Friday. But Zach promised me that he would have it uploaded today.
And it will be. It's,
He didn't promise
it's
me that.
halfway done.
Okay. All right. Well, without further ado, Faith, will you introduce our special guests today?
Yeah, I was just going to say, another reason why this episode is going to be so great is because we have two special guests. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Pamela Anderson, and this is my husband, Byron Anderson.
Hi.
So, just let's recap our history a little bit.
Sure.
Byron, you and I met in our past life of farming.
Yes.
I don't farm anymore. Do you do any farming anymore?
I work with farmers all over this Midwest.
Okay. Yeah, I sold my cattle.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm no longer.
Yeah.
But that's how you and I met.
Yeah.
And it was quite coincidental. And I think maybe the first time we ever met, we realized we were both followers of Christ, and that
Amen.
really changed the dynamic of our relationship.
Yes.
And then if that wasn't a big enough win, then I met your wife, Pamela. I was like, Pamela, what are you doing with Byron? No, I'm teasing.
That's what I asked too.
All right, well, why are they here, Faith?
Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your mission field?
Okay. About a year and a half ago, God called me out of being a high school principal and called me to the mission field. And I am almost retirement age, which is kind of unusual to start a new career when you're supposed to be retiring. But as my sister likes to say, I don't want to get to heaven with a golf club in my hand. I want to get to heaven having worked hard and being ready for resting at the throne of grace. So when God called me to this position of Share Education Services, it was a bit unique for me in that I was able to stay in the education field, which is what my major is. But what I needed to do was talk to my husband because he was not necessarily called as I was. And it was really God directed from the very beginning. And I'm the type of person that wants to have plan A, B, and C in place. And if you don't agree with me, I have lots of arguments to persuade you to come with me and join my, way of doing things. But God just spoke to me and said, you can't do that this time because it's going to have to be of me or else this whole situation isn't going to work. So I had to take my hands off of talking to Byron and having him process if we were going to become missionaries as a couple. So do you want to share a little bit, honey, about how that worked?
When you asked me about being a missionary in Hungary, serving with Share, which is the missionary organization we work with, I asked, how much does it pay? And she said, nothing. So I said, I don't see how we can do this. So my first answer was no. And I I spent the next week to 10 days. I travel a lot to different farms and work with men who work on the farms and with the owners and do consulting and training. And during that time, I listened to podcasts of different.
This podcast?
No. It might have been persuasive, but I listened to other podcasts of men that I respect a lot. And it's interesting. Most of the guys were talking about this one word, surrender. And to me, that's kind of a negative word. To surrender means you give up. But they talked about it as a very positive thing, to surrender your life to Christ and say, here I am. I'm almost 70 years old, and I'll do anything you want me to do. And I wasn't ready to say that quite yet, because I like what I do. I work with cows, and I work with farmers, and I like that. I didn't think I was ready to be a missionary. But in my job, I try to talk to people about Jesus. I try to show them the love of Jesus. But to go somewhere else to do that, to a foreign culture, wasn't in my game plan. But I did come to a place. It was after one particular message I heard 3 times, because every time I heard it, it just moved me very deeply. And I did surrender. The song, All to Jesus I Surrender, all to Him I freely give, was probably my theme song at that time, right then. So my heart surrendered. I had joy. I had peace about doing this, even though I had no idea what it was going to be like.
So I had to quit my job, and actually Byron had to quit his job as well, because we travel between America and Hungary a few times a year, because we live part-time in America and part-time in Hungary. And so we are, usually it's 3 months there and 3 months in America, because we don't have residency permits yet. So we have to be out of the country after 90 days. And then we have to be out of the country for 90 days, because it's a Schengen region. But what we do is Share Education Services was created about 25 years ago. And it was a bunch of missionaries that got together and said, you know something, we've got families that are leaving the field and are not being able to share the gospel anymore, because they're struggling with educating their kids in a cross-cultural environment. Missionaries, sometimes people have this idea that when missionaries go to the field, that they're perfect, and missionaries don't have problems, and missionaries don't have issues, and that all their kids are right on in their classrooms, and they don't have any discipline problems, and they don't have any special needs. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so they know that God has called them to a foreign field, but how do they stay there and make sure that they're doing what's best for their children? So as we were preparing for this, we learned that there are 2 main reasons why missionaries leave the field. And the first one is that they don't get along with one another. I know that's hard to believe, Christians not getting along with one another, but that does happen. And the second reason is that they can't educate their kids. So Share stepped in and said, we want to do whatever we can to help these people. So what we do is we hold 5 conferences a year for our main emphasis. We hold our big one in right outside of Budapest, Hungary, and that's going to happen in 2 weeks. And then we hold one in Athens, Greece. We hold one in Malaga, Spain. And then we hold another one in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, and in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And our region of service is Europe, Middle East, Russia, and Central Asia. So we have a lot of families that we try to connect with. And these families come into our conference for a week. and they can get special ed testing. They can, we have seminars and workshops that they can go to, so that if you're a homeschooling parent, you can learn strategies on how to teach your child how to read, or how to get through chemistry, or how to work through some math concepts. We also have educational psychologists who volunteer their time and come over and help to do testing for children. We also have a ministry called from Barnabas International, where they come over and just work with families, because it's traumatic working and living in a cross-cultural environment, and parents need help. And so we have resources for parents to come and help with their marriages. Every morning we have worship time and prayer time, and we just come to really circle the wagons around these missionary families, where they can feel normal, they can worship in English, they can pray in English, and they can connect with other missionaries who are struggling with the same issues that they have. And outside of our conferences, we also go to our sponsoring agencies' regional conferences. So we'll send 2 staff members, and we help with testing, we consult with parents, we do one-on-one work with children. We also have a program that Byron is involved in. It's called Career Direct, because one of our biggest areas is the teenagers that are preparing to come back to America to go to college. We want to make sure that they have the academic survival skills that they need, plus just understanding when you are living overseas, you're called a third culture kid. They used to be called MKs, missionary kids, but now they're called third culture kids, TCKs. And TCKs coming back to America really struggle, because they have a different outlook on the world than a teenager from America has. So we work with them and help them in their spiritual formation as they make this transition. Plus, we have folks that are over here in America that connect with those kids during their first year of college to say, hey, I'm a resource for you, and I'm a help, and if you're struggling with something, give me a call, or if I'm close by, I'll come and see you. And so we try to meet the needs even after kids have left the field and come back to America, and we help the parents that way as well. So we have lots of little fingers with our organization, but that's kind of it in a nutshell.
A question that came to me as Pamela was talking was actually for you, Byron, in this career direct testing.
Yeah.
These missionary kids, just
Yeah.
out of curiosity, do any of them want to be missionaries, or are they do they want to get out of there?
That's a good question. The testing they do for Career Direct will help them see if that's truly where their interests are. I mean, it's like I don't know if you've ever taken tests like that, but it's like a almost 2-hour test. It really helps you to narrow down where your interests are. Because sometimes you think, well, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a nurse, but you haven't really thought about where your heart interests are, and this helps you find out where your heart interests are. Now, if your heart interest was in sharing the gospel and being in another culture, because that's some of the questions go into that, it would help you to see that, hey, maybe this is where you really your heart really wants to be, is back on the field. And we run into kids who want nothing to do with being a missionary, because they haven't had the greatest experience on the field. And then I see some kids that are just on fire and want to go back and want to tell people about Jesus in another culture. So you see it both ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is most of your interaction with these families at these conferences, or do you actually go on site to these regions and visit these families at their homes?
We do it both ways. Our primary focus is that families come to us because we're serving hundreds of families. We have 20, right now we have 21, we call them sponsoring agencies. And so some of those agencies are, for instance, the Southern Baptist Convention, and that's a huge amount of families. We serve Greater European Mission. We serve International Messengers. We serve let me see, the Presbyterian Church. We serve the Evangelical Free Church. And so if you, Frontiers,
Send,
Pioneers, Send. So if you are a family in any of those organizations, you are ones that we want to target, and we want to help you with whatever issues you may have. And some of our staff will say, you know what? Our kids, we have a group of, for instance, with Crew Campus Crusade, they would have a what we would say a glut of families in an area, and they'd say, we've got 10 families and we need to have them tested for special needs. Could you come? And so we will send a couple of missionaries, of our missionaries and our staff, and they'll go to that area. And sometimes they work with an international school or a Christian school, and they can pull the families there. They can test them. They'll be there for about a week, because it takes a while to test the kids. Then we have to write our reports, and then we have consultations with families. So we have families that come to our office in Budapest. If they're going to be in the area, they say, hey, I've got a couple of days. Do you think that you could assess my child? We're getting ready to come home and do a home assignment for a year. We just want to make sure our kids are ready for the public school in America. Could you tell us if they're on target for the same grade level that we think they're on, or is there something else that we need to work on? So we do it many ways. Whatever it is to meet the needs of our families, we try to fulfill those needs.
Now, you had mentioned you were a principal
Mhm.
of a public school, and I don't know if you said this, but that was in Mountain Lake.
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to be asking you questions that you weren't prepped
Sure.
for, but
No worries.
how has that prepared you, and in what ways has that prepared you for what you're doing now?
About, let's see, it's 2019. About, no, I guess it's 16 years ago. I was working with a nonprofit organization, and God said, you need to go and get your master's degree in Christian counseling. And so I did that. My sister and I finished that. And we kept saying, okay, Lord, so how are you going to use this? And what are you going to do? How can we serve you using our skills that you've told us to get? And about 5 years later, I became an elementary principal. Then I became a high school principal. And I started using those skills meeting with parents. And, as a high school principal, you would understand about that, Blair, as far as meeting with families and counseling them. And the difficult thing for me is that being a public school educator, I could not bring the gospel into my conversations. And I felt lonely in that, because that's so much of filling that black hole that people find themselves in, is that it's only Jesus that's going to fill that. And I couldn't share that readily with families, but I could use the skills that I had learned. And I started using that with students, in counseling students that I had to. Usually the principal's office is not the place when they come in and have fun things to talk about, but it's usually the hot seat in the principal's office. And so I could begin to hone my skills with that, and meet with families and talk with staff. And I believe that God was just preparing me for this position by taking me through difficult times. And I think back, and as Byron and I had gone through missionary training, they encouraged us to keep thinking back to the ways that we saw God work in our lives, and keep saying, oh, God prepared me for this. And that's exactly what he did through my previous job, is that God prepared me for meeting with families. To tell a family when they think that everything is okay, and all of a sudden you say, I'm sorry, but your child has dyslexia, and as they go into education and get into the higher grades, they're going to struggle. And sometimes that can be devastating for families, because they have so many other issues just being on the mission field and being in a culture that's foreign from their own. Here's just another set of problems. Oh my word, how can we manage this? Nope. We come alongside them and say, no, we can help you manage this, and help you to be able to continue your ministry, and yet making sure your family is taken care of as well.
And I hope I'm not delving into anything too personal here, but you mentioned your training. some time ago when we were talking, Byron, you mentioned something that has stuck with me, and I've thought about it an awful lot since. And it was about your missionary training in, was it Libby?
Yeah,
Libby,
Montana.
Montana?
Yeah.
And do you remember what you told me?
No.
You said that after, I forget how long you've been married, but you said after this long a marriage, it wasn't until we were cooped up in a house together in this small bedroom, and there was multiple families, multiple bedrooms, but you were just confined, and you said it wasn't until then that you two got to know each other.
Yeah.
And so that stuck with me, and I thought, and it's probably unrelated to what we're talking about, but I think about that often with my wife Amber. I'm like, how well do we know each other? And anyway, so that was fascinating to me.
We had some really good training while we were there, because marriages, a lot of times when they hit the stress of a mission field, they can break down. And some of the training we had there, it used some of Paul Tripp's teaching on marriage. And a really big one, a really big week was, or a couple days was on not my will, but thy will be done. And when we would look at a problem that we were discussing, where we started to look at, are we just trying to get our will done, or are we trying to get his will done? And I think as our wills started again to surrender to his will, I saw huge changes in my wife, and she probably saw the same in me. I didn't really need to change
Right,
it much.
right. I was going to say.
He was good.
But no, it was very good.
Well, it was a matter of saying, Paul explained it, that each of us have our own little kingdom that we are king or queen of. And as you come together as a married couple, are you going to remain the king and queen of that kingdom, or are you going to let the Lord be the Lord of that kingdom and surrender your will to his, because only then can the two kingdoms come together. And that's really what we found.
Yeah.
Another super personal question, but it's and feel free not to answer this, but you said your first question was, well, how much are we going to make on this? And the answer was nothing. What do you guys do for finances? Is it do you receive donations? Do you
That was the very first week of training, was on raising your support. And so it's, people getting behind you and supporting you, and going out and finding those people and asking them if they will support you. That's a hard thing. To me, it's like a really humiliating, or I don't know, it was humiliating, it was humbling anyway, to go out and ask people if they would support what we're doing. We haven't raised all our support yet. We're still looking for people that would partner with us and support us. But I have kept my business, and I guess I see a little bit like Paul and his tent making business that supported his ministry. So I've kept my tent making and still see farmers. I have my own business. I'm not working for a company anymore, but I still do consulting with dairies when I'm back here.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
I tell people that I tell them proudly that my whole life I've never asked anybody for money, and then I became a pastor.
That's like being a missionary.
That's 90% of my job now.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the greatest joys of my life has been supporting young missionaries as they're getting ready to go, and we still do it, even though we don't even have our own support. We just told a young lady here this week that we would support her. But that's one of the greatest joys, is to see people. I feel like I'm part of missionaries going out all over the world, because I'm helping them with prayer and finances.
I think the other miracle that we have seen is that in spite of our disbelief in, oh my word, how are we going to raise enough money to be able to manage this? God continues to put people in our pathway that will come right out and ask us. And so when we think, okay, so I guess I need to go and say, well, we don't have all our support. Will you give to me this month? Kind of like, the Oliver scene, food. And God continues to send people in our pathway with the message to us tell them about what you do because they want to give or they're ready to give. And so we're always looking for people that we can share our ministry with, because it could be that the churches that we visit, we're serving your missionaries. And we want you to know what they're doing and what they're going through, because sometimes they may not be able to share that with you or feel uncomfortable to share that with you, but we can.
I wanted to wait till the end, but knowing me, I'll forget. Can you guys, just for our listeners out there, and kind of the main focus of this podcast is to get people excited about Christian education, to get people to realize all the facets of Christian education, this being a new facet we've never discussed before. We kind of focus on Christian schools, homeschooling, what else? Bible camps, youth groups, things like that. This is kind of a unique perspective on Christian education. But for those listeners that want to give and want to support and have been moved by what they're hearing so far, how do they get in touch with you guys?
What they can do is there's a share website, but easier than that is just to email me at panderson@shareeducation.org. That's the easiest.
Repeat that one more time.
Panderson, Anderson, @shareeducation.org.
Okay.
And we would be happy to hear from you. And if anybody that would like us to come and visit them or come and share at your church, we would love to do that. If it's Sunday school or a morning service or a women's group or a men's group or Bible studies, we are just open to come and get the word out about what we're doing to serve our missionaries.
So, with these different families that you visited and these different places that you've been, what is their attitudes or their culture's attitude towards Christianity?
Good question. We can go into some cultures and it's not a big deal. If you want to talk about Christ and you talk about God, there's no issue with that. But then there are other areas, for instance, when we go to Kyrgyzstan, when we go to Tajikistan, where we can't even bring Bibles with us. When we have to be mindful of the size of the group of Americans that we bring into the country because it becomes suspicious. Before we go to the country, if we get emails from, say, for instance, you're on the prayer chain for your church, we have to tell them to take it off because our emails are monitored. And when we go out to get a sandwich or we go out for an evening meal and we're in a restaurant or a fast food place, we can't talk about, so what mission are you with? We have to say, what organization do you work for? We can't use the word missionary. We can't use the word faith. We can't use the word Bible. So you really have to change your mindset in how am I going to have this conversation, because you don't want to jeopardize the families that we're serving. Last year we were in Thessaloniki, Greece, for a conference. And while there, we heard that one of our families who served the Kurds in Turkey, that a pastor of theirs had been arrested and was in jail. And immediately, you didn't sense, I was amazed to watch this, but these families, they didn't register fear. What they registered was, okay, what's our plan for getting back to the field because our work isn't done? And we have to get back there. So families would, for instance, one family that we knew, the father went back on one day with one child, the mother went back on another day with the other 3 kids. And so these families, they work together not to live in fear, but to live in, hey, God's not done with the work that we have here. So let's be vigilant. Let's see how the Holy Spirit is going to work this so we can get back to tell more about Christ. So those kinds of things that we get to see and get to pray with these families, work with these families, is just exhilarating. And we just want to tell everybody back here what families go through and what they do just to get the gospel out, because it's so important.
We had the opportunity about, 3 months ago, to go to a place in Hungary where there was a couple young ladies who had a ministry to university students. And you remember these university students spent 20 some years under communism. So they grew up in a godless society. They know hardly anything of the Bible or anything about God. And we had the opportunity to talk to these university students and share our story. That's what they wanted to hear from us, is how we came to know Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my story, and Pamela told her story. The other lady that was with us told her story. And it was great because like 2 weeks later, I got an email saying 3 of the young people that were in that group that listened to your stories have given their lives to Christ
Wow.
after hearing your stories. And so that was I've had a heart attack, but my heart had an attack. It was leapt within my chest when I heard this news. That I tell you, there's nothing like sharing your story and see people come to Christ. It's just awesome.
A vision that we were given as we've done short-term missions before we became full-time missionaries is that every person has a timeline. You have your birth at one end and your death at the other. And in there, God is working. And when God calls you to do something, it's somewhere on that timeline. And what you're doing is you're impacting another person on their timeline. And only God knows what that timeline is and where you are impacting that person. Are you planting the seed? Are you watering? Are you harvesting? And so when God calls you, you never know where on that timeline you're serving, but He knows. And I think about the times that in my past where I've said, oh no, I just don't feel like it, or nah, I just, I'm too tired. And now as I've been in ministry and serving these families and serving these, for instance, these college students, I wouldn't want to miss one opportunity because it is so wonderful to see how God's working and what joy I get from it. Not just sharing with them, but how God blesses me with that. And I wouldn't want anybody to miss out on those kinds of things.
Why do you think that what you're doing right now is so important prior to like 10, 20 years ago?
My brother-in-law was a missionary's kid back in the 50s. And his parents were missionaries under the Free Church, and they were in Japan. And Dennis and his brother Ron, Dennis was about 6 years old, and his mom tried homeschooling because over in Japan they didn't want to have to send their kids to public school, even though that would be a good thing to get to know kids and get to know the language and so on. But because of the religion, the Shinto religion that was taught in public school, Dennis's mom and dad said, we're not sending you to public school. We'll try homeschooling. Well, not every parent is gifted to homeschool. Sometimes they have to make sure that their kids are going to be served elsewhere. And Dennis, at the age of 6, had to go to a boarding school. And the separation that he had from his family was devastating to him. In fact, he is now in his 70s, and it still is right there. It's so, it made such an impact on him. And what we do is we work alongside families so they don't feel like, well, I have no other choice. Yes, we want to do what's best for your family. So what has changed in the past 10 to 20 years is that families now realize, well, it's not just this or this, but we have a family in outside of Bucharest, Romania. They have 8 kids, I believe. 2 of them are in international school, 2 are online, 2 are homeschooled, and 2 are in a national school. And so it might be different for different kids in your family. And we walk alongside them to make sure that they're seeing how to make the best choice for their family. We don't make the choice for them, but what we do is we present them with questions. Have you thought about
Options.
this? Have you thought about this? Now there's an area over here you might want to consider. What about this? So that parents can say, okay, we have tried to, before the Lord, done everything we can to make sure that our children are going to be served while we are serving on the mission field. So I think in that way things have changed, because it used to be that everybody went to a boarding school or everybody went to national school. But now we don't have to do that anymore, because there's so many opportunities that parents have on the mission field.
Hmm.
I've got another question for you, Byron.
Okay.
So Pamela, being a public school principal and getting that Christian counseling master's degree,
Mm-hmm.
I can see how a lot of her past prepared her for what she's doing. I'm curious how your past prepared you for what you're doing.
In my work, if you go to a large dairy today, most of the people doing the artificial insemination or working with the cattle are not people from the U.S. They are people from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala. So I work with people from other cultures, even in my work in the last 10, 15 years has been with other. I was counting up the other day, I think I've trained 500 people who speak Spanish to breed cows. And I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I speak enough. I had a Spanish veterinarian ride with me one time, Dr. Carlos Simmons, and he said, I won't use his exact language, but he said, your Spanish is terrible, Byron. He said, but these guys, they can tell that you have a heart for them. You have a heart for them. And that's a language all of its own. So I think that my past, I was a teacher at one time and a coach in high school, and enjoyed that somewhat. Enjoy cattle a whole lot more. So I did go back to being with cattle, and but I think some of those experiences, and then a lot of my brother is the head of a mission, International Messengers. He's the president, and so I've been with him on many short-term missions, and I have a heart for people of other cultures too. So that helped introduce me to that possibility.
I think also Byron leads the prayer ministry at our conferences. So when families come, we have a prayer box, and when we first started with Share, we thought, oh, who's going to put a prayer request in there? It's like, they won't do that. Oh, my word. Byron was busy. Byron was busy meeting with these men and with these families, and they could see his heart. So his preparing of that in the past, working with those on farms, has really transitioned to working with our missionary families one-on-one, which is, he's gifted at that.
Another thing, I don't want to imply that you've been too influential in my life, but another thing that you told me one time that rattles around my brain a little bit is, you said when you drive around the Midwest and you see a herd of dairy animals, you can immediately tell in the different traits and characteristics of that herd the influence your career has had on that herd. You remember telling me that one time?
Yeah.
And we did a show a few weeks ago on legacy, the legacy of Christianity. And I think, how neat would that be if I was able to drive and see through a community and see my career has influenced this, perhaps someday, this herd of believers. I don't know if you can categorize believers as a herd, but I thought that's a neat comment, and it's I don't think it was a prideful comment. I think it was, here's the work of my hands, and here's the result of it. And now your herd has expanded to the world. And,
Amen.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Amen.
Well, I thank you guys for coming. We'll put that email address in the show description,
Mhm.
right, Zach? Would you guys close us in prayer?
May I say one more
Yeah,
thing
yes.
before we go? If there, one thing that we do at our conferences is because missionary families are, they don't always have their support. And so when they come to a conference, uh, sometimes they're in need, and we give scholarships to them. And if there's anybody out there that would like to give to share conference scholarships so that kids can come and be in the program, for the week for a teenager, it's $80. For kids that are kindergarten through grade 6, it's $50 for the week. And we would just encourage churches, Christian schools, families, if they would want to say, you know what, this is the Pillager Baptist Church Scholarship Fund for a specific conference, for the Hungary conference or the Greece conference, for any teenagers coming in or grade school kids. That would be a wonderful ministry to our families and would help to connect them with folks back in the States when they think nobody's remembering me, and we say, yes, there are those praying for you back there, want to be your prayer partners and want to help you through this.
Faith, do you see that their heart for the mission field is frustrating? Here we're trying to promote their email address, and Pamela's like, "Oh, if you're gonna give, why don't you give?" I do appreciate your guys' heart in that. So, but you guys need to eat too.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Also, what would you say for like maybe families or people that like feel like they're called to do missionary work? How would you encourage them?
Mm.
Or what would you say to them?
Good question.
Mm. Let's say, first of all, go on a short-term missions trip. Don't go to paint a wall somewhere or build a house. Not that those things aren't important. Go somewhere where you're going to share the gospel. See how that goes for you. And the other thing is, be a missionary here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can be a missionary in another culture if you can't be a missionary here. Be a missionary every day. Just be ready to always tell people about the hope that you have within you. So then you need to have a hope within you. But Jesus needs to be precious to you, and you need to love him here. And then if you can do that, then go on a short-term trip sometime. Pamela can refer you to some places that go and share the gospel with people. And you'll get a week of just being able to do that. See how that goes for you. Did you like being in a culture that you didn't know most of the signs that you looked at, and you go in a store and you couldn't read what you were buying or whatever? Can you handle that? Is that intrigue you to meet people from other cultures? Those types of things. You'll get to see if that's really where God's calling you. And if God is calling you there, please go. Please pursue it.
Try it.
Please pursue it.
And we also have opportunities within Share. At all of our conferences, we need people that will come over and volunteer their time and pay for their way to get there and their hotel and everything. But we need groups to come over and take care of and be teachers for a week when our missionary kids come in, because they spend a week in school, which is more Americanized than it would be for what they have on their mission field. And we need teachers, we need special ed testers, we need ed psychs, we need speech pathologists, we need all sorts of people that will come in and help our families. We need presenters at workshops, and to come to any of those 5 locations where we are looking to have our conferences. We are pursuing possibly having a Dubai conference in the summer. I know it's very hot, but because we have Middle Eastern families that have a difficult time getting out to one of the other conferences, and they can easily come to Dubai because it's in the Middle East, and their country that they come from will easily let them back in. And so they deal with that, but we're pursuing that because we want to reach more of our families. So if you're interested, come over, even just to visit a Share conference. We would love to have you come and see what we do and see if you can get the bug too.
Anything else, Faith?
I don't think so.
Well, that was fun. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
You're
Thanks for
welcome.
having us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you guys close us in prayer?
Sure.
Father, we are so grateful for what you did at the cross for us. To have you give of yourself so that we could live with you eternally is beyond comprehension. So, Lord, as you ask us to give of ourselves for you and your work, we want to do that readily. And we want to do that with outstretched hands, saying, I'm here to serve. Thank you for this opportunity to share about our organization and to bring before so many what our missionary families might not be able to do. We love the work that you've started, and we know that you are in the center of it and that you are calling others to come and join us. Please, Father, keep pursuing them. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to be able to share your vision and your goals and your work that you have set before us. I pray for Pastor Blair and for each one at this school as they are a light in a dark world. I pray, Father, that Jesus would just ooze out of this building and out of each of these staff members and students, that people would see that they are different and there's a reason why. And when someone comes to ask, that they are ready to give an answer. Give the world hope as to what they can have for eternity. Thank you, Father, for this day. We just honor you and want you to know how much we love you. Thank you for everything that you have provided for this school. Thank you for the grace that resides in these halls. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.